Welcome to Brewing TV. I'm your host, Michael Dawson, standing in what a few months ago was a green and verdant hop yard. Today, it's snowy, it's cold, it's time to brew a big beer. And many of you have asked for a grain to glass episode. We're going to deliver this week. From yeast starter to fermentation over the course of a 5-day period, brew along with us as we make a big American barley wine. It's about as warm as it's going to get all week. And this bitter isn't keeping me warm. Let's go inside and make some yeast starters. We're a couple days out from brew day. That means we have time to propagate the yeast. Anytime you're brewing a beer of the gravity of which I'm thinking, which will be considerable, you need a lot of healthy yeast, not just a large number, but healthy cells. We're doing an American barley wine, shooting for a gravity in the 1090s. So we're going to need lots of soldiers. Where are my soldiers? I put them in here to keep cold. This is some 1272, some Yeast American Ale 2 that has been in a few fights so far. This was most recently used for the wet hopped red rye ale several episodes back. I've been keeping this stuff alive and in cold storage. I've been top cropping it and washing it. So this has been stored at about 32 degrees since the end of August under some sterile boiled water. And now I'm gonna make some yeast starter wort to feed it. Put it on a stir plate in preparation for the brew day Wednesday. Let's make some magic. What we've got here is a few ounces of DME topped with a pinch of yeast nutrient, stir bar, and to get some water. This is going to be a gluttonous barley wine, not just because of the high original gravity, but because I'm going to do a Parti-gyle batch. I'm going to do 2 beers from 1 mash. There's going to still be sugar in the grain and the mash tun, along with several gallons of liquid that I won't need after I collect my pre-boil volume. So we're gonna make a small beer from the second runnings in the kettle. Should be about good for water. Let's build a fire under this guy. When you're making a yeast starter, you really have 2 choices to think about. Do you want sushi or sunflowers? Today, I feel like sushi. I add the DME first and the water second. Dissolves a little better, but you still have to shake it up and baby it a little bit. And once the flask starts getting hot, that's when your choice of sushi or sunflowers becomes important. Now this is probably 80 or 90 milliliters of pretty much pure yeast cake. I've shaken it up to make sure nothing's stuck to the bottom for when I pitch it in a few moments time, but that's a lot of yeast. Why am I making a yeast starter with it? Because like I said before, you're not just concerned with population, but also the health of the cells. So we want them full of energy reserves built into the cells. We want them in fighting shape. I actually have a couple plans in place for brew day and throughout fermentation. Woo! Sushi, citizens, sushi. That was a textbook illustration of the dangers of boiling in a tall, narrow-necked container. That hot break can get away from you really fast in that graduated neck of a flask. That's why I often recommend beginners start making yeast starters by boiling the wort separately in a saucepan. It's a lot harder to boil over a quart of wort in a 2-liter saucepan than it is in a 2-liter flask. It's been about 15 minutes. I've been swirling the flask intermittently and replacing the water as needed to keep it cold in the sink, and it is cool to the touch right now. This doesn't need to be fermentation temperature cool yet, just not hot enough to kill the yeast. Colder than blood temperature is going to be fine. I boiled my Teflon coated stir bar right in there with the starter. Contrary to what Phil Hartman's Frankenstein would have you believe, fire is good. The stir plate is going to provide constant, steady trickle of oxygen and agitation of the yeast to keep them in suspension while they ferment our wort here. Beauteous. So that constant, steady trickle of oxygen will let the cells build really strong membranes, which for our high gravity, high alcohol barley wine is going to let them withstand the pressure of that really dense wort at first, and throughout the course of fermentation, as the alcohol content ratchets up and up, it'll help them resist lots and lots of cell death through that high alcohol content. T-2 to brew day. Yeast is being fed as we speak, being vortexed as we speak. Gonna let it sit here on the plate at a warm room temperature for a couple days. It's probably not gonna take that long to do what needs doing on a molecular level, but better to give it too much time in case something goes wrong and I need to replace the yeast. Knock on wood, citizens. Brew day. 2 days after making the yeast starter. It's cold. We're heating up some mash water out here in the garage. Got a couple dogs riding shotgun on this brew session. We're making an American style barley wine. I'm gonna parti-gyle it. Gonna do 2 beers out of 1 single mash. The first 5 gallons of runnings we get from the mash will be the barley wine. Whatever's left over is gonna be a low gravity session beer. This beer is called the Wookiee. The small beer is called the Ewok. A guy who worked at Northern Brewer long ago when I started, the guy who taught me to decoction mash, a guy who I learned a lot from, used to be fond of relating the anecdote that in Return of the Jedi, the Ewoks were originally supposed to be Wookiees. You wouldn't think there'd be that much occasion for an anecdote like that to come up in conversation, but Fredrickson worked it in a lot more often than you'd thought. So this brew session is for him. Wookiee and the Ewok. Air temperature, 8 degrees Fahrenheit. No wind chill to speak of yet, but I have tricks in store for ways that we can keep warm. They don't involve cuddling, don't worry. I also mentioned on the day we made the starter that I had a couple tricks in mind for keeping this barley wine dried out and not being cloyingly sweet with a really high finishing gravity. One of the things I'm going to do, since this is an all grain brew and I can kind of adjust this, is do a really low and long mash rest. We're going to do 149 Fahrenheit for about 75 minutes. That should give me a really fermentable wort. We are so close to hitting strike temperature. I'm going to start getting ready to mash in. This is a pretty simple grist. I've been on a simple grist kick this year for big beers. It's just 20 pounds of domestic base malt and a pound of 60-degree crystal for a little blush in the cheeks. I did another barley wine, the English barley wine, that was just straight up Warminster Maris Otter, golden barley wine. We're going to tuck into that a little bit later. As a native son of the upper Midwest, I always try to brew outside at least a couple times every winter. just for the experience of it. A couple years ago, when the weather report was coming back that some night in late December was going to be the coldest night in X number of years, I made a point to go outside and brew at night. I did a really ridiculous Russian stout. It's just super high gravity, super high hopped, lots of late hops, tons of black malt. It was just inky. But the air temperature was something like 30 below zero, and then there was a wind chill on top of that. It was just incredible. The sky was that velvety black, not as dark as the beer. Stars were bright. There was just steam billowing out of the kettle like a smokestack. I remember the brew session much more vividly than I actually remember the beer, and I think that's one of the coolest things about being a home brewer, is because the experience of the beer goes so far beyond the glass. It's actually not too bad today. It's above zero, and once the sun gets a little further up over the horizon and starts striking the top tier a little more fully, we'll be just fine. All right, so what you're looking at here is what I'm calling Warwick Golden, and this is that golden English barley wine I had mentioned previously. This was sort of the first serious trial run of the Northern Brewer Neo Britannia yeast in a really, really high gravity wort. This was somewhere in the neighborhood of OG 1120. It's about 5 months old right now. It was very drinkable early on, kind of dangerously drinkable. It's quite effervescent, as you can see, which wasn't really what I was going for with this, but if you let it degas a little while, it's quite nice. So we've got a couple small pours here for breakfast. Chip's gonna join me, and we'll tell you what it tastes like at 5 months of age.
It kind of reminds me of an extreme, amped up cousin of Potter's beer in the strangest way. The first thing that hits me is kind of what you described as the green tree fruits.
I mean, they're both single malt beers, this one and the Potter's beer. Like you're pretty much tasting the straight up base malt and nothing else in that. The Warminster to me is very lager-like. It's got just a tang of sulfur behind it. Very bready. It's a lot like a Pilsner malt.
This example is definitely carbonated. It's kind of champagne-y.
It's definitely warming too.
Right.
You don't necessarily taste it, but you feel the alcohol. All right, we're taking a break, warming up while the sparge water heats. We're just about to close out the mash. Before we do, came in, check on the yeast. It's been on the stir plate for 36 hours, give or take. And it is nice and milky looking. When I came downstairs this morning, before dawn, there was still a little bit of foam at the edges that's sort of been beaten back into suspension right now. At this point, I'm gonna turn off the stir plate, start letting it settle a little bit before we pitch it. You guys ready to go get cold again? As I mentioned before, this is gonna be a Parti-gyle batch. Up until the 19th century, Parti-gyle was not anything special. That was just the way all the beers were made. You had a quantity of malt in your mash tun. You'd run off whatever liquid was in there. That was the first gyle. That would be your strongest beer. That would go to the head abbot, the lord of the estate. Then you'd add more water, more hot water, fill it up again, stir it up, run off the second gyle. That would be a moderate gravity beer. And then you do a third or maybe even a fourth gyle with even more water, and that would be the weakest table beer you'd give to the peasants on your estate or the lay brothers of the abbey or the pilgrims that would come to the church. Parti-gyle is still pretty cool. A lot of brewers still practice it. A few off the top of my head. Fuller's Chiswick bitter is made from the subsequent gyle from their bigger bitters. Royale does one. They make a table beer after they run off the first wort from their Royale. And then probably the most analogous one I can think of to what we're doing today is Anchor's Old Foghorn and their small beer. The small beer is the second runnings from their Old Foghorn barley wine. We're pretty much going to run off what's in here into my boil kettle. That's going to be super high gravity wort. We're not going to have to sparge it very much. That will be the Wookiee. We're going to add more hot sparge water to the mash, run that off into a second kettle. That's going to be a pretty low gravity beer. I might beef it up with a little DME if it needs it. One of my other top secret techniques for keeping warm during winter outdoor brew sessions in Minnesota is something I can't really take credit for. I read about this in a Ray Daniels book, and I'm sure he probably got it from somebody else, but the hot scotchy. Got here some wort. That's the hot part. Here's the scotchy. It's got a fish on it. And this must mean it's about time for some more canoe tasting notes, Chip.
Holy cow.
It's pretty good, isn't it?
Holy crap. It smooths out the scotch like.
Mm-hmm. You can still taste the peat.
Yeah.
But you can't
Who's
really feel the
Pete?
burn. Oh!
This is so drinkable. It's scary. It's just like hot tea, really.
It does taste kind of tea-like. Yeah.
Try this.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you can't see your breath while you're brewing your barley wine, try this. Holy man.
Could somebody do this with an extract batch, do you think? I think you could, as long as it wasn't too hoppy. I think if you put hops in this, it would ruin the effect. But if you were brewing in like a partial boil extract batch in your stovetop, and you maybe after you add the extract, but before you add the hops.
Yeah. Welcome to Brewdog Battle Royale. We're in the backyard today where Risa has Charlie P scrambling. Charlie P comes back with the trademark blue eye stare down. Risa runs him off, cuts back to catch a snowball, lands a powerful left-hand death paw. Charlie P back with another lunge. Risa rushes in. She's got little Charlie running for the ropes. What's this? Charlie P out of the ring and eating snow. That means the Beagle is disqualified and Risa, the real-life Wookiee, takes the round. Not too bad. Pre-boil gravity on the Ewok of about 1030. I think we'll just let that ride. Consider it a low-gravity American pale ale, an American bitter, if you will. Gonna finish both these with some homegrown hops. We're using Centennials for some late additions in the Wookiee, and I'm thinking of trying some Liberty in the Ewok. Finish hopping with Liberty, hell yeah. It's an unconventional choice for an ale, perhaps, but it's a Hallertau hybrid, and it's got a lovely aroma. We've hit a boil here on our little 1030 small beer, and we are off to the races. 2 beers, 1 mash. We are at time for the Wookiee. 10 minutes to go on the Ewok. It's time to add some hops. Finishing Centennial for the barley wine. Gonna do Liberty in the Ewok, both from the backyard. They froze to the bowl, citizens. There we go. For reasons that may seem oblique unless I explain them, I'm going to transfer the beer from the 15-gallon into the 10-gallon kettle. I'm going to use this like a big hop back. I've got about 4 ounces of whole leaf homegrown Centennial in here above a false bottom. I want to run them off to separate the hops from the wort.
I'm going to use the 10-gallon kettle because it's deeper than the 15-gallon. I'm going to use an immersion chiller indoors to chill the wort before I run it off into the fermenter. The 10-gallon with a deeper dimension will be better for my immersion chiller than the shallower 15-gallon kettle. With that, I'm running off the wort. It's snowing again. And the final gravity on the Wookiee is about 1092. Let's finish the Ewok. A legion of my finest stormtroopers are stationed on the forest moon. Yeah, right. If they had been Wookiees, that would have made sense. Teddy bears? I don't believe it. Teddy bears with like Stone Age technology? George Lucas, you let me down as an adult. The Wookiee and the Ewok have both been chilled. They've both been racked to their fermenters. It's time to give them a little squirt of oxygen before we pitch the yeast. The Ewok, as you've probably noticed, is fermenting in a 10-gallon stainless steel stock pot. The reason for that is because I'm going to do kind of a quasi-open fermentation on this beer. It's going to be covered up, but it's not going to have an airtight seal or an airlock on it. And it is also going to be my next generation of this house culture of 1272. It's going to be used to top crop some yeast. So you can see that in the couple hours since I turned the stir plate off, we've got some really nice settling going on here in the starter. We've got a good cake of yeast at the bottom, some, as of yet, milky slurry up on the top. The reason I turned the stir plate off when I did is because I don't want to add as much of my yeast to the Ewok, which is only 1044. I want to save most of it for the Wookiee, which is 1092. Probably should have done this first, but it's very important to label your carboys. Here are my visual representations for these two beers. Time to slap them on and let my house culture of 1272 go to work. Yub nub. Frozen pump notwithstanding, I would have to say we had a pretty good brew day. We will come back in a couple days to check up on fermentation and do a couple more little beer nerdy things. So until Friday, cheers. TGIF citizens, welcome to day 5 of our brew week. We are just a little bit shy of 48 hours from pitching the yeast, and things are well underway. If you want to see what was going on with these bad boys at about 24 hours past pitching, we'll have that as a separate video on the site, link below the episode. Right now, as you can see, the Wookiee is fermenting very vigorously. Required a blow-off hose yesterday. I am going to add a little bit more fermentable sugar now that it is at high kreuzen. I'm going to add 1 pound of Ames Farm Minnesota honey. Just got it in a pan of hot water here to make it easy to pour. I'm going to add this now to kind of preserve some of the aroma. It's a really delicate, beautiful smelling honey. It's got a little bit of flowery, almost lemony aroma to it. That's going to mesh really nicely with those centennials that we used for finishing. But more than that, I want to ratchet up the alcohol, dry it out, hopefully shave a couple points off my final gravity by using this highly fermentable sugar. The reason I'm adding it at high kreuzen and not in the boil kettle is kind of a staggered addition. I want the yeast to work on the harder to ferment malt sugars first. We'll give them the simple stuff later, kind of like starting out with your hardest job first and finishing up with the easy stuff. The Ewok is also at high kreuzen and kind of a quasi-open fermenter, a Dawson square. I skimmed it yesterday to get some of the hop oils out of the yeast. That's in that video linked below the episode. Now, there were a lot of hops in this batch. It's a little less than 5 gallons, and we used close to 5 ounces of hops. So the second Kreuzen, which I wanted to skim and save, still has a lot of hop oils in it. A lot of hop oils. Normally I would discard that, but since this is the second Kreuzen, there may not be a third because this is a fairly low gravity beer, or at least not a very big third Kreuzen. Hey, Charlie. I'm going to skim it and save it anyway. I'll wash it later to get those hop oils and trub and other material separated from the yeast. Always sanitize your gloves after petting a dog. We got a keg full of Star San here. Honey and the Wookiee, skimmed yeast from the second Kreuzen on the Ewok, and I've got a little bit of a culture started. If I get a third Kreuzen, I'll skim that too and add that to it. I'm gonna wash it all, and then that will be my 5th generation of 1272 here, ready for the next batch. The Ewok looks like it's maybe a couple days, maybe 3 days away from finishing fermentation. That'll be ready to rack, get a little bit of secondary for clarification, and then drink that pretty fast. The Wookiee is going to need some more time in primary. I'm going to keep rousing the carboy like that, keep the yeast in suspension, keep it working. That yeast is going to be spent by the time fermentation is done, so that's all going down the drain. It's going to be a good beer, but it's going to need some age on it. This is a beer we can be drinking next winter, and for many winters after that. It should age very well. And speaking of aging very well, Chip's got a special treat for us. We're going to end the episode with some more tasting notes. To the garage.
So we're in the garage. We're going to be drinking a barley wine style ale called Sisyphus from Royale Brewing Company in Blanco, Texas, outside of Austin, Texas. I wore my Central Texas Kiteboarding Association shirt.
Should mention that it's warmer out right now than it was all day on Wednesday when we brewed this.
It's like 18 degrees, so we're in t-shirts.
It's a heat wave.
The special thing about Sisyphus is it's a barley wine, but it has a very healthy dose of rye in it. There's another beer that Royale makes called Full Moon Pale Rye. And this is kind of the stepped up, amped up cousin of it.
First wave is almost like a Doppelbock. It's a really deep, rich malt character with a healthy shot of alcohol in the nose. The rye definitely comes through in this. This is really nice.
It's got a numbing. It's definitely got the alcohol because it numbs the tongue.
It's starting to feel like it's maybe 21 or 22 degrees out right now after a couple sips.
So it's about exactly 3 years old. The interesting thing and what Mike alluded to as far as aging is I wrote an article when I lived in Austin, Texas about these guys and this beer, and I was lucky enough to have them lay out a vertical tasting of like 2000 through 2005. And at that time it was 2005. So it was the full spectrum from the most recent bottle, which was very hoppy, almost like a barley IPA or an IPA wine, and then the oldest one was just a great fruit bready raisin and plum, just a thick syrupy spicy plum. It was awesome. It was wonderful. So that goes to speak about how with this beer and any barley wine that you make, aging is going to make it better, hopefully.
Definitely changes it, if nothing else. You know, this reminds me actually, you know who made a rye wine?
Yep.
Carl Engebretson, Northern Brewer's graphic designer. It's pretty awesome. He documented it on the Northern Brewer blog, northernbrewer.blogspot.com. We'll link that under this episode too. You can also get to it from the footer at the bottom of the homepage of northernbrewer.com.
If you like brewing TV, you will like that blog. It is not like any blog you'll find anywhere else, I think, because there's so many contributors with so many interests within the realm of beer that it can be a very social aspect being blog, or it can be Jeremy King's insane scientist yeast prophecies being dropped. So check that out for sure.
It's true. There's a couple posts off the top of my head about barley wines and Parti-gyle Brewing, so it's a nice tie into this episode. Carl's rye wine was actually a Parti-gyle. He did a rye wine and then like a small rye beer from the second runnings, and then he actually split each of those up again and fermented them with 2 different yeasts. So you can read
4 beers for the price of 1.
Right. So you can read all about that plus his tasting notes on the blog.
And it'll be a feature in the January 2011 catalog.
Northern Brewer catalog coming out January 2011. I think that about covers it.
5 days, man.
5 days.
It's been a great 5 days.
It's been awesome. I don't want to sound dogmatic or anything. This isn't the way to brew barley wine. It's just a way to brew barley wine. Thanks for hanging out in the garage and brewing along with me.
It's the Dawson way of brewing a barley wine.
Oh, stop. All for brew?
Brew for all. Brew big or go home.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Thanks, Royale.
There's just a little bit of chocolate stout left. I think I'm gonna drink it. Oh, frozen. My glasses are fogging up. Can't see a damn thing.
Risa and Charlie P will have to be listed as assistant brewers on this one. Charlie P! That's right. I named my dog after my homebrew guru. What? I don't know what. What did you name Risa after? Uh-oh.
Queen Theresia of Bavaria, whose marriage to Prince Ludwig, one of those two, was the start of Oktoberfest as we know it in Munich. So, Theresia, Risa, Risa. Not Spanish for laughter, because she's a German Shepherd.